welcome to the Friday Payroll Club, Joss.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate you joining us, and we're in our first ever official, if you call it official, podcast studio today. So we've rolled out all the stops for you.
Oh, I appreciate it. It looks very nice and very comfortable also.
It is. But yeah, look, really glad to have you on, and I know you're a very busy man. We've kind of set the scene a little bit of what some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But I think as ever, it's always good just to get a bit of an introduction to you and you know, your part in the bigger Bar2 picture, for those that don't know, and yeah, just a little bit about your story and kind of how we've come to be.
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah, loaded up front, sorry.
Loaded up front, yeah. Ease me in nicely. Thanks, James. I appreciate that. So I'm CEO of Bar2. Yeah, I guess just sort of been in and around the sort of staffing space for 15 or so years, and this is where my trajectory has taken me, and now we're trying to do some really exciting things with how we sort of make an impact in what we think is a space that really needs some impact to be made.
Yeah, I mean, there is already a lot of murmurs around what the state of the industry is going to be. I mean, Aaron and we obviously speak to a lot of customers, and it's in some bated breath, but also I think in some like gratitude of the changes that are coming. It does sound like there's going to be some pretty big ones that people need to consider. What's your kind of general take on, you know, umbrella reform as it's coming down the pipe? You know, what kind of, yeah, what's your perspective on it?
I think it's definitely needed. I think we've had years of ambiguity around what good looks like, particularly. I think you have differing personalities with differing aims as well. And that can mean that there can be some fairly unlevel playing field in terms of the types of risks that people are prepared to take. You know, fundamentally, we straddle employment and tax law, and it can be quite murky at the best of times. And I think many businesses and people have been calling out for something like this for a really long time. So I think in general terms, I think it's a really good move. And I think it should help certainly build some trust in what happens, because I think there's a lot of different noises and different opinions that mean that people don't really know who to trust. And hopefully this can go some way to building and regaining some of that trust.
I like that. Yeah. Where would you say, Joss, where did it kind of begin, this umbrella reform? So it's been going on a while. It's a bit murky, but where, like, I think it was around, there was some stuff around 2014.
Yeah. So if you look at the umbrella reform that's come out now, there was a call to evidence around 2021. And I think this was after some quite high profile stuff around micro umbrella companies, around some of those COVID testing plants. I think it was G4S. We're on a Radio 4 sort of investigation. And I think that really sparked it. But yeah, if you go all the way back to 2014, that was sort of, there was offshore intermediaries being used where people were paid offshore, didn't pay tax, and you know, obviously they have a personal tax liability, but that wasn't something that was shared amongst the people that would be promoting those schemes. So that was that in 2014. And I suppose if you want a bit more of a timeline, you then had changes that brought in inshore, you got offshore intermediaries, and then you had the full self-employment onshore intermediary stuff that brought in this supervision, direction and control. I think fundamentally people tried to hide behind clever contracts that said it was supervision and not personal service, and revenue kept on losing on that, despite some case law around, or I think it was auto cleanse with purposive. That sort of born the hybrid EDM type model. But that's what people do. You know, fundamentally, when legislation comes out, someone very clever will find a workaround.
Yeah. It's interpretation of the wording.
That's it. You know, there's often hastily drafted legislation that has gaps, and it's those gaps that create opportunity for people to continue to act in that sort of, to steal one of your phrases, bad actor type ways. And I think hopefully, you know, that this has been worded seemingly quite well. And so, yeah, hopefully we start to see less of that. And I certainly feel like that, long sort of tenured in this area, that certainly feels like the sort of net is closing a little bit on some of the really ridiculous things that you've maybe seen in the past. Definitely. But you still see it,
Yeah. I saw something pretty ridiculous recently. I won't say anything or name any names, but there's some bad actors out there doing some really shady stuff.
What are reputable names you'd call, like household names in the space that people have a lot of trust in.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the rug will get pulled, and that's when these bad actors and whatnot. It's
a shame. Like it does, and also like recently we've had customers that have come to us with an issue. I'm not making enough margin. Can you do? I've heard of this or that. Can you do these things? And we can't do them. And hopefully reform gets rid of that as even being an option for companies, and clients pay more, and it raises the rates, and everyone makes more money.
I mean, you start getting me into the sort of economics of it all. It's fine. You start getting into the economics of it, and it's tough economically. You look at I had a sort of pub chain who was quite well respected, local to me, who have just got into insolvency, and there's high costs, and it's very difficult at the moment for many businesses, and so it is a challenge. And I do think, unfortunately, people will continue to take risks, and these you're not always going to see a totally level playing field, because where there's a demand for people to use certain arrangements, they'll still exist
until it can't, and they're stung with these ridiculous.
You just
penalties.
need a big enough one to go.
Yeah, and it happens, right? I mean, you see, even on the last couple of years, there's been some really big names that have, again, not to go into kind of the nitty gritty on here, but there's some big firms, both agency firms and non-agency firms, that have been stung in some form or another, and it sends a ripple, doesn't it, through the industry.
Yeah.
That kind of, my next question is like, how did it get so messy? And I think you've already hinted at it. There's a lot of grey area. There's a lot of advantage it's taken of kind of loopholes and wording, as Aaron's pointed out. Its umbrella has still not been defined, right? We've still not got a clear definition.
No, we have sort of got a definition. It says that what they're saying in the draft wording is that an umbrella company is someone that employs people fundamentally. But then, the immediate loophole of that is, what happens if they're not an employee? This doesn't cover them. So it's only where PAYE, I would assume, is enacted. So you have to, the big question for me is enforcement. What does that look like? Because it's all very well and good putting in legislation, but you have to enforce it. And, are you seeing enough visits going on? Is there enough compliance activity? I think there's probably enough legislation that people would fall foul of now. And is not being enforced because there's not enough inspectors, there's not enough, and all of that sort of side. So, that's the big question for me, is how do you enforce it?
And there's a reasonable care comes up a lot, right, in terms of good practices and procedures and things that they should have in-house. Is that kind of still subjective in your opinion? Is there kind of clear guidelines on what reasonable care of an agency should look like when engaging their client and in turn a payroll partner like Bar2?
I think you can't bury your head in the sand, fundamentally. That would be the opposite of reasonable care. So, understanding what reasonable care actually is and what a threshold of that is, I don't think that's ever going to be defined, and that would be up to someone else to decide whether or not reasonable care has been taken. But, fundamentally, just having having a process is probably a good starting point.
Yeah. In that same light, it's going to impact end hirers or businesses that engage temporary workers. It's obviously going to impact people in our space, and it's obviously going to impact people in temporary labour. Agencies and recruitment businesses. Do you think any one particular is going to be hit the hardest? Where do you think that's going to land in terms of those three buckets, as it were?
That's a good question. I think the way that it's worded, and from what I can see, is it doesn't hit anyone harder than anyone else. And potentially what it does do is encourages more collaboration across those businesses rather than just pushing it down or pushing it up the chain. So yeah, that would be my immediate take. I wouldn't say that. I think the way that agencies would probably feel like they're hit the hardest.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're perceivably now on the hook of some sort of kind. But my opinion is that I think they've always been on the hook to a degree. Criminal Finances Act, although the sort of burden of proof when it's criminal is much higher than if it's not criminal. Obviously, that's to be beyond, if you understand law, it's beyond reasonable doubt, which is like 99% certainty that someone has done something wrong. So the burden of proof is much higher. But that's existed, don't quote me on this, but for probably about 8 years. I think it was circa 2017, 2018 that came in. So, you know, I think, again, that's the agencies would probably feel like they're hit the hardest.
Yeah. I get, and I think they're probably the ones that are under the pressure, a lot of the pressure as well. Like, we speak to a lot of clients that are in industries where you're lower paid work. Margins are extremely thin. You're dealing with pennies, not pounds on an hour. And, you know, they're putting in a huge amount of graft for arguably minimal returns, it feels like. And then with all this other legislation and market changes and economic factors and all these other variables which, you know, have an impact, I understand the pressure that they're under. But what I really liked about your explanation there is, and the word that's really standing out, is more collaboration and actually like open, honest conversation with all aspects of your supply chain. Just means that like you're leaning on each other for the bits that you're not experts in, or not experts, maybe not the right word to explain, but just more collaboration and more communication, I think, is better than not. And there's you can't kick the can away if you've all been in the same room, you know?
No, I think you pick up on something there that's probably worth elaborating building on. If you look at, I think it's a statistic, something stupid like 70% of recruitment agencies are considered small and have less than 10 employees. If you look at a typical umbrella type business or intermediary, I would imagine most have way more staff than that. You know, look at our headcount is substantially more than that. And then if you go up the chain, you know, the types of people that these staffing businesses are supplying into, they can be one of many. You might be supplying into a painting and decorating subcontractor who's quite small, lots of project teams and delivery teams, but actually headcount, head office type headcount is quite small. And so really it's about understanding the role that each of those businesses play in how to use contingent labour and gig-based labour. I think that's probably what needs to happen more. Yeah. You know, recruitment agencies are not going to be geared up to being able to lean heavily into this world of compliance and tax technicality, and so they're going to need to rely on suppliers that can like lift that load for them. Likewise, an end hirer is not going to be able to do that side of things, or necessarily the resourcing side of things that they're leaning on. So it's all about making sure that you build a supply chain that you can trust, but there's also a bit of openness with, you know, if there's people aren't prepared to be open or transparent about how they're doing things, it's probably a bit of a problem, and you should ask questions.
I'm seeing it already with companies just in the last few weeks. I was off last week, but before I was off, there was 2 companies reaching out to me before any of this has gone live, wanting to put together their own compliance packs and audit us and build their own kind of processes for this. So it's good to see.
That should have been happening for years. That's the reality. This should have been happening for years.
But it won't, you know, with anything like this, a lot of people won't take action until there's a bit of a shock.
Or it's late. Like you'll start to see, well, you know, if you go back onto that idea that most recruitment agencies are small, you know, right now they're not worried about what's happening in April. They're worried about what's happening next week. So it's quite hard to have the foresight and the forward planning to be prepared for that when you're like, I just want to make sure that I've got money coming in for the next quarter. And, you know, it's tough out there.
It is. And sorry, go on.
No, go on, James.
I was going to say that, you know, again, client conversations is where a lot of these themes come up. And I think even agencies which historically weren't necessarily struggling on things like, client terms, and they had pretty fairly stable, repeatable terms. They're now being pushed out and out and out. I mean, there was a article on, it may be in BBC, but there's now a new piece of legislation that's coming in for construction businesses that their payment terms can't exceed. Is it?
I've not seen that.
So there's something around late payment anyway. But there's recent bubble, and that's like outside of our industry. That's just them as a whole. I think businesses are facing newer, more evolving challenges than what they were a week or so ago. And if it is hand to mouth every week just to make sure the lights are staying on, how can you invest that time or that money into future proofing? Because it's a big murky. It's tricky.
So what you'll see is with them deal with that in March, not now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, great actual kind of lead into the next question, which interestingly, I was asked this from a new company. I won't again name any names, but new company set up and leaning on us for advice, which I come to you for because I haven't got the answers for a lot of these questions. But one of the questions was like, I'm a new company. What do I need to be looking out for? What's coming down the road? What risks do I need to worry about as a recruitment director?
What risks do I need to worry about?
What are the risks that I don't see coming?
What are the risks?
Worry about?
That's like that's a really big question again. You're really like easing me into this, guys. I feel that this is really kind. Thank you. Obviously, I wouldn't quite go that far. What would I be saying? Like, firstly, make sure you've got good contracts. Like, contracts are a really good starting point, but actually understanding your contracts, like, they have to be lived. Like, that has to actually reflect reality. Like, if you have have clauses in your contracts, they need to be an actual process that are executed.
On that, would REC's stuff be all right just to use?
Yeah, of course. And I think, again, going back to the idea that most recruitment agencies are small, they're going to have to. But I don't think it's as easy as just taking the off-the-shelf contract and then just saying, right, I've got a contract. Like, read it, understand it. Take advice of saying, okay, like, what processes do I need around this that are going to mean that this contract actually means something? Without wanting to be too techie, there is legal precedent that talks about the purposive nature of written information. And what that basically means is if I have a contract that doesn't reflect reality and is so far away from reality, and it can be demonstrated that it's away from reality, I can't rely on it, especially with an individual, like less so in sort of corporate space and like business to business type contracts, but contracts with individuals, if you want to rely on it, you need to be able to evidence that it reflects reality. So if you've got a termination clause in your contract, you need to be able to say, this is exactly how my process works and this is exactly how it's written down. Otherwise, it's just going to be say, right, well, we're going to set that to one side and we're going to look at the actual reality. And then it starts relying on, you've got things like, have you created anything? I've seen some pretty interesting stuff with recruiters using WhatsApp, creating bind for themselves over just how they message people on WhatsApp and so on. I think there was a case with quite a big like known recruiter that they got found in an employment tribunal for unlawful deductions because of the expectation that a consultant made over how they'd been messaging on WhatsApp. And so you have to be really, really careful.
Thank you.
It's all right. But beyond just that, I think it's quite hard to avoid this change. They're talking about joint and several liability, which has challenges, and I'm not sure how they actually execute it in terms of understanding like their execution. They're creating a new chapter 11 of ITPA, and there's better people to talk to that could talk you through the mechanics of that legislation. But joint and several liability means that anyone who engages someone engages with a party that's employing people is joint and severally liable to make sure the tax deductions are correct.
So that brings into us and this upcoming stuff there.
Yeah. Interestingly, and this isn't me that noticed this, but I've seen and read and seen it, but you might find a situation where end hirers actually insist on an umbrella company being used. because if someone is on an agency's PAYE, the end hirer becomes joint and severally liable. And so you might find that actually end hirers that understand will probably want a longer supply chain than just
diversify the risk, isn't it?
It just moves the risk down a level. So it means that the risk sits with the agency rather than being pumped up to them.
Yeah.
So a bit of an unknown consequence of how it's been drafted, but that's an interesting one for you.
To watch
And on the other side, I would like to think that the experience for the worker in an ideal world remains largely unchanged for them. But do you think there's going to be any impact that kind of kicks back to the worker?
In a negative sense, like what?
Positive or negative?
I think what you'll probably see is you're going to see the use of technology for sure, and I think you'll see sort of independent verification start coming into the space, and you might then start to see that there's maybe a bit more sort of feedback to contractors that their pay has been calculated correctly. For example, you might see a bit around that. So that might build a bit more confidence in sort of people operating this space have currently. But I don't necessarily see any downside unless obviously you're wanting to take advantage of things like loan schemes and so on that are obviously not all right.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I would see a huge impact on workers. Okay. They shouldn't feel it anyway. Really, it's not something that should impact them.
Yeah. I guess like if they're, and maybe speaking out of turn, but there's obviously pros and cons of different types of products that workers can go on based on what type of trade that they're doing. And if there was any reform or anything that comes down the line on moving away from limited as an example for like sole traders and things like that, or whatever it may be, like is that is that just think something that would ever crop its head and kind of force people to be in this PAYE more?
Well, look, you might find the opposite.
Right.
Because at the moment, it only covers employees. Mm-hmm. You might find that there's a huge push towards self-employment. Like you could see how it reacts. Like the economic forces means that, you might...
People care about take-home pay.
That might be an outcome. And is it the right outcome? No, it isn't, is the reality, because you've got long-standing employment status tests.
Come in with all of that, right?
Yeah. But fundamentally, it's something that I could see happening.
Yeah.
And I think you might see some sort of old things that have been maybe negatively talked about come back to the fore. Like you might see joint employment type models come back, and that's not something that I would suggest is a good thing to happen. So I think it all comes back to that question of enforcement.
Yeah.
How does this get enforced?
If you had a crystal ball to kind of look in it, what would you...
I'd be absolutely loaded if I had a crystal ball. I think we'll see the same patterns play out. I think you'll see 75% of people get on board with it, and then you'll see others that try and use it as an opportunity to cash grab. And unless it's properly enforced, given what I see economically, people will use it.
Yeah, it's like anything, isn't it?
Yeah.
People take advantage of whatever scenario they can to get they want.
Yeah.
That's the thing when you're dealing in an industry with... That's not just our industry, but if I can say, a commodity has its own emotional driver.
Yeah.
Like it's not as though it's like a clear cut, this is this and that's why it's that. It's more people have mouths to feed, bread to put on the table, all of that stuff, and people do what they do.
My hope is that you just get a bit more clarity. I think at the moment, like
worker education,
general education,
right?
I think there's so many people. Like if I was someone who was, even an end hire or an agency, and I didn't have my background, I could imagine, I could see it's totally overwhelming knowing who and what to believe, because all the messaging is different.
Yeah.
Everyone says, "Oh, don't listen to that person," and that's quite a lot of poor salesmanship in terms of people just use blaming, will sell off the back of someone else, or and I'd like to see that sort of maybe reduce a bit. Would be nice.
That has gone on for the 12 years I've been here. It is every bit of legislation that comes out, there'll be scaremongering and fake news and bad sales. Yeah, exactly that. I would like to see that reduced.
It's a lot. It's tough, isn't it? Because it's a very noisy. There's a lot of recruiters out there, and everyone's going after the same market, as it were. And I think in our 500 plus umbrellas.
Some estimated
like
250, I would say, like middle of the road.
And that was my next point. And what's the differentiator between the bad, the mediums, and the greats? It's hard to make sense because there's so much waffle that goes on into it. And again, that's one of the reasons that we're doing this as a project is, giving people kind of a sneak behind the veil a little bit and trying to go out with, value led advice, not advice as such, not legal advice, but giving people a bit of a straight talking view on the market and what we're all up against. And I don't know if I had a question in there for you, but the differentiator between the kind of goods and bads is not really a single source that says yes, these are definitely in the good bucket, bad bucket.
But it's never existed. It's never existed. Everyone's tried to say, oh look, we've got X, Y, and Z, or we're HMRC approved or compliant or
certifications.
It's like there are some things out there that do good.
Yeah.
And there are some initiatives out there, accreditations and so on that do a really good attempt at trying to sort of do it. But fundamentally, do your own due diligence. Like check. Like if you're using a supplier, like understand it. Like not to every technical detail, but like check them. Like ask, can I see some pay slips?
Yeah.
Can you show me on your bank statement that the pay slip amount matches the amount that you paid this contractor? I want to see you're not tampering with pay slips. Like that's check. Like that's the only way of knowing is check. Just check that the outputs that someone is saying they create are what's paid to a worker. Get independent verification, do it regularly, make sure things are being assessed in terms of employment status, make sure things are being checked like right to work, make sure there's continuous monitoring of like, are people's visas expiring? If someone is self-employed, are they being retested periodically? Like, just check. That's the only thing I can say. And that's the only, going back to one of your early questions about reasonable care.
Yeah.
That's reasonable care.
And showing that you've done it.
And keeping a record of it.
Auditing yourself almost.
Like, it doesn't have to be extensive. It's not like, I've got a payroll of 50 people a week and I need to check every single one of those. Like,
reasonable.
Yeah. Check 5 a month or a quarter or whatever it is. Like just check and make sure it's random and make sure it's thorough as well. I think that's the big problem. It's like, show me 5 pay slips. Well, show me the payment that matches that pay slip, because then it's not been tampered with. And that's so there's PDF editors and all of this sort of stuff. I'm sure that people are.
The rise of AI and
it's so easy. Like just be thorough.
Yeah.
Like take a proper audit sort of approach to it, where you would check the bank statement of you. I've got a payment. I can see you've paid this man. Show me the bank statement remittance. Show me his pay slip. Show me where you've invoiced me. Show me that you've paid the money to HMRC. All of that. It doesn't have to be extensive.
Yeah.
But just make sure it's thorough.
Do you think it's important the agency knows, if it's an agency or the end client, knows the structure in how that guy's paid? I.e., like, so I'm dealing with some people, or I've spoken to some people who use a company, but they're not sure how that company's actually paying them. The guys are being paid and there's pay slips, but they don't know if it's umbrella or is it normal PAYE. They're not sure how the fee works or if there's a fee. It's a bit hidden. It's a bit kind of murky, and the company isn't sure how it works, but are quite, the guys are happy, so they're just kind of leaving it alone. I'm saying it's a bit dangerous. Might be worth knowing exactly kind of what structure that is.
I don't think you have to go down to the actual granular detail of this understanding the structure entirely. However, I'll caveat that if it is non-standard, you should have assurances over like what it is. If there's non-taxable amounts being like, just understanding it like in terms of the elements that are on a payslip. If the full amount that you have paid has not been subject to tax and national insurance, understand why. That would be my sort of catch-all statement. There's things that I see even now that still hurt my head. And so, you have to ask questions. If it's hard to understand, maybe it's deliberately hard to understand.
Yeah, well, this is what I think they were doing. And I mean, I couldn't understand. Sent stuff to me to look at, and I couldn't understand it.
There's really good guidance on the government's website. There's not often, I would say that. But their check act review for labour supply chain stuff, it gives you really clear instructions on what you should be checking, how you should be checking it. I would say just following that is a really good start. Like, make sure you understand who employs them, if they're employed, or who is contracting with them. Who's the director of those companies? Like, understanding who you're working with, or have a relationship with them. Like, simple stuff. But just being thorough, I would say, is probably a good starting point.
We should put a link to that.
Yes, you should.
Yes, we will. We've covered a lot. And kind of before we head into some of Aaron's hardest hitting questions,
I look forward to them.
if you could kind of a bit of a catch-all statement of one final piece of advice or a learning that you've had that's kind of supported you through these types of scenarios before, like if there's any kind of one final nugget of information you could share with the listeners, and like why would that be your advice is the kind of secondary follow-up.
Firstly, don't panic. I think that's the worst thing to do. Like, I've heard that Revenue acknowledge that good umbrellas are one of the best tax collectors in the country. You know, if you look at it, this amount of cash that flows through these types of structures is huge, and it simplifies it for HMRC as well, because if you hear different estimates of the number of recruitment agencies, for example, we'll stay with recruitment agencies, see different estimates, could be 40,000, 25,000. It's a lot of businesses. You said it, it's roughly 500 umbrellas. That's quite easy to sort of enforce. If you start there, you can have a look at a huge number of agencies in one quite big hit. So don't panic. They want the structure to exist. That'd be my starting point. But I would say go to events, listen to loads of differing opinions, but find some people that you trust that can help you sort of turn it into plain English. I would say whether that's a legal advisor, an accountant, I would always say try and keep it relevant to someone that's got industry experience that specialises in staffing and gig-based work, because it is quite niche. The sort of different like it's not like huge, far-ranging bits of like law or tax law that needs to be reviewed. It is quite niche. So find some specialists, find someone that shares values with you, and try and build some rapport. But again, just try and take a measured approach. That would be my advice. Because the thing is lots of noise has always existed around this space since 2007, so it's way before I was working in it, and it's still here. And
there's always something. There's always another thing. Oops, even in my year and a half, that I feel as though it's not completely different, but the whole landscape is. Every month there's a change that's happening.
Quite a big change, I think, economically in that year and a half, which has changed some values, I think, and some sort of outcomes or goals of people. But I think it is a fast-moving industry. And it's I think there's a lot of noise in it, which doesn't help. And so I think just trying to quieten that down and find some
weathering the storm and just kind of finding that path, sticking to it, taking good advice, and
it's just big process. It comes back to process. Like, you can only do so much. Like, we're not asking. I don't think it would be fair to expect perfection when it comes to this sort of stuff. But taking I want to try and do the right thing approach, and I've tried. I think is a really good start.
Yeah, for sure. Nice moment to finish the more serious stuff off on. To Aaron's hard-hitting questions. Here we go. Are you ready? Brace yourself.
All right. No, these aren't that hard. Hold on. Okay, let me get ready. Joss, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. What's a phrase in the industry that you wish probably me, would stop using?
I'm going to be quite big here. I hate the term umbrella company.
I thought you'd say that.
I hate it. I can't.
I don't like it, and I say it because that's people know it. It's exactly. And I'm like, look, I hate to say this, but we're an umbrella. We do all of these other things, but it's a product. We're known as an umbrella company.
We offer. It's not we're not under our offering is broader than the umbrella itself. You know,
I think it's quite lazy. I don't know what it could be called that's different, but yeah.
There we go.
I don't love it.
All right, no, I like that. That's a good answer. Joss, if you had a magic wand, what practice would you ban across umbrella companies?
Chatting rubbish.
Yeah,
I find some of the infighting. I see it quite a lot. It's coming into recruitment as well, but just this like, it feels like it feels like something rotting from inside. Like people just infighting and just
like toxic behaviour.
Yeah, like sometimes again, like I don't want to call people out, but you know, worrying about others and just complaining about others and sort of stood on your soapbox.
Talking about others.
Sometimes those that are shouting the loudest have got the most to hide, and you know, I don't like it. And again, going back to that idea of just like collaboration, you know, I've got loads of people that I know in the industry and loads of people I think are really, really good. And if you understand that we work in a really, really difficult space because it's so, it can be quite technical and there's lots of changing case law and actual law and, you know, understanding that the intention is that we all want to do the right thing and those that don't want to do the right thing don't, but just like the arguing drives me mad.
A lot of strong opinions and big personalities that kind of clash with this stuff, I think.
And someone's like, I'm right, you're wrong, that sort of stuff. Like, it just drives me mad.
I've got this degree, so that makes me
I'm
more right than you.
I'm not right. Like, I think it's just having that open mind. And
I've always, to be fair, not to gas you up or anything, but I've always kind of liked the approach that you take when these things come out is, you know, everyone's screaming and shouting and posting and look at this news and do this and do that. And normally it's a bit premature. We will generally, our stances or your stance has been sit back, wait till it actually comes out, and then we will do some proper advice on it rather than speculating and guesswork and scaremongering.
And I don't always get that right, but I think scaremongering is the last thing I want to do. I think that comes from a value of actually, like, if I was a layman and I was working and I was impacted by this, all this noise would confuse me. So I don't feel like I should add to that noise just for our own agenda. Like, it doesn't really, I don't think it's helpful. And I you know, I've been at some good events recently. Well, I have to say the general rhetoric around the people there is sort of echoes that generally, that, you know, try and take that measured approach and try and make sure there's some consistency. And there are some really good voices and some amazing people that have done some heavy campaigning and sort of lobbying around what's happened and the outcomes. And that's why I think, you know, I'm not necessarily the best person to be speaking around all of this, because loads of people have put a huge amount of effort in to get us to where we are.
Any of it worth mentioning or linking or anything? At this point,
I'm not here to sort of start bigging up others. Like, I'm sure they've got their own platforms, they can do that. But, you know, there are some good voices that have done some good work. But even still, like, I think it was the day after the draft legislation, I've got customers ringing me up saying they're being sold to, like, off the back of it already, and I'm just like, come on.
It's just
like,
uncouth, isn't it?
There's
no salesmanship anymore. Gosh dang it!
it just bothers me. I'd like that to stop.
cheap.
It is cheap. That's exactly right.
Last one.
Go on then.
What is the biggest myth recruitment directors still believe about compliance or umbrella?
What's the biggest myth? I don't know. You guys are probably better placed to give me some myths, and I'll tell you whether give me some things that people believe, and I'll tell you whether or not they should believe it or not. What do you hear?
I hear a lot of confusion around IR35. A lot of confusion around IR35 and limited, and what IR35 is, and who's responsible, and who needs to do what. Companies don't seem to know.
That's IR35 is a really good example of what could happen with this, because it's a similar sort of mechanism in terms of like how you pass liability up the chain. And, you know, again, we saw people in the legislation, it tells you what to do. There's a process in the legislation, just do it. But we still saw people coming up with these elaborate substitution models and all of this sort of stuff. And that's a really good example of how this could work, in my opinion. And you've probably seen changing attitudes on that, of like blanket bans, and then actually no, soften it. And I think that's a good bit of legislation that maybe could show us a little bit about what might happen with this, because I think you'll probably see maybe some similar trends, unless they actually bring in some enforcement. They are talking about this Fair Work Agency that's going to have extended sort of responsibilities, and the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, it sounds like it's going to be rolled into that, and it sounds like the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate is going to take on the due diligence for umbrella companies. But my question, I guess, to our listeners would be, if you are a recruitment agency, when was the last time you saw someone from the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate? I'm sure there are many agencies out there that have never had a visit. And so that comes down to that idea of enforcement. And so, not really an answer to the question about myths.
It was they're all tricky questions.
Oh, you've eased me in. I think to try and give you a myth. I think there are some people out there that are scared of the use of umbrellas, and they have they said, all right, well we'll just do it all in house. And I think you might see that change as a result of the fact that actually an end hirer might force you to use an umbrella because they don't want the liability of your PAYE. And then that might then make people have to start thinking, okay, maybe there is a place for this sort of business in the supply chain.
Yeah, I think it's to repeat the analogy that you said, it's people sometimes have a connotation with a supplier, and as soon as that one instance has happened, it's all of a sudden every other supplier that's in that same space becomes the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's like having, I guess, a little bit of faith and a little bit of trust that not all umbrellas are dodgy backroom grey suit kind of bean counting, as it were, but actually there's a wealth of different types of businesses out there that do things the right way, and kind of, not to go up onto soapboxes as you said, but present themselves as the right way to go, I guess,
elevate the industry.
Elevate the industry. There we go.
I think I will say as well, actually, like we've seen some failures recently around businesses giving incredible credit terms. And that probably sounds a bit too good to be true. And I would say that maybe it's not a myth, but people can get lured in with that sort of thing. And, fundamentally, they're lending out tax money. And if there's delay on payments of their taxes, you might start to see more failures. Yeah. And so I would just say, like, understand it a bit better. Make sure just
be wary,
check. As part of your review, make sure check someone's accounts. Make sure they've got enough cash to settle their liabilities. Like, you don't have to do that every month or every quarter, but as part of your due diligence process, check their statutory accounts on Companies House. Like, how heavily leveraged are they? Little things like that. I think you just got to be careful these days.
Yeah, great shout.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Episode 5 of the Friday Payroll Club. Josh Lowery, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking it easy on me.
And thanks for taking it easy with us. And then on to the next one, where, if I'm not mistaken, we've got a conversation with one of our charitable businesses, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So more on that to come. And until then, welcome to the club.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
There we go.
Thank you.